Boom, 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 boom. Let's see here. All right. That sounds about right. Are we live? I think we're live. This thing's not working right. Stream health. This is like the most useless widget. Doesn't tell you anything. All it tells you if it's good or not, which doesn't help me. Alrighty. Yep, that's where we wanted it. It's kind of interesting. I'm curious. Let's see what happens. The 1 hour on the extended time frame has the 180 EMA right there, right at 331, which is kind of curious. I really didn't think it was going to be that on the nose, so I'm not super interested in that being that on the nose, but it did hit the this is a weird excuse me, I'm sorry. This is a weird thing because this is actually almost exactly what I had, which is kind of strange. So it makes you feel like, well, it's gonna happen, right? I don't know. The thing is like it's almost spookily the same, which is very odd. Spookily? That make you laugh? Oh. You laughing at Colin? Brr, brr. Okay. It's almost spookily the same, which I think is really bizarre. Because I have obviously my own opinions about like what happens, but this was a one that I had charted and I said, you know, if it's a shallow S curve, it's going to come here. The weird thing about this, and I'll explain it in a second. The weird thing about this is that the this was based on this line. It's super strange to me. It was based on the doodle that I made, and I was looking over at the right side thinking about like where does that fall if it drops on the right side, where does that kind of end up? And basically that's the same, and I think that's very odd to me. So I had done this yesterday very much on a whim. It may have even been after the stream ended, but this is the same. I didn't change this because when we were doing the measurements, it's just what made sense. Now from here, if it's the exact same, it's bullish. So if it pushes up back above, and it probably will come back up no matter what, but if it only barely comes back into this range and it doesn't breach this top here at like 340, then it's not necessarily bullish. So on AMC's part, this kind of has to be, this doesn't have to be the bottom, but it can't not react, if that makes sense. At some point, if it comes down again even, it has to react back up, and it has to push above this 340 mark. If we don't get above the 340, you haven't made an advancement. So it's very, very important that it pushes up above that. It doesn't have to push up all the way or anything like that. It just has to push up enough to get above that. It probably, frankly, will probably get stuck on this yellow line coming up. That's a pretty major marker. Everything else here is almost 1-to-1 so far, which again is kind of odd. That's not very usual. Even if I make a good estimation, that's not typically what happens. So I'd be pretty surprised if it ended up being very much the same. Not because I didn't think it was likely. I mean, I thought it was likely we were going to have a shallow S curve. I said as much, but more that I just wouldn't have expected it to be exactly right. So we'll see. In any case, I'm playing upside and downside still. Downside, I've got farther out puts, and I don't think they're going to do very well until like way later. And I honestly don't know if they're going to do well at all, to be fair. But I think that that's just a risk that I'm taking as a hedge long term, because I do think this is going to come back down. But also here, I think if this is a shallow S curve, it's really only going to see upside until basically, again, I don't know for a fact it's done with downside. So just that caveat has to be there. But I think that you have a good chance this is going to run up all the way to 460s. So 461 looks good. Otherwise, across the market, we've got kind of a mixed bag day. Most things are just sort of slightly up or slightly down. Everything's kind of just chopping. I don't see anything major. I mean, Wolf's up huge, but it didn't make that move till like a minute ago. It opened up really low this morning down here at 139, so it did make a big push, but NU's sitting at 0.21, Fang's at 0.12, MBW 0.33. I mean, these are just marginal moves, just slightly moving. The SPY, the S&P 500 is only up 0.15. Kind of a boring morning thus far. And then the IWM is slightly down. It is important to note some of these tickers have made higher highs, and that's a bit of a concern, because when you have that push and you've made that advancement, especially if it closed over the top, which I believe most of the major indexes I think did. I think the IWM did not. I think it was below the top when it closed. Yeah, I think it was, but SPY was above, so I think that's curious. That would be noteworthy, because then you have to, at this point, hold that support, and or if you're going to do a backup, if you're going to end up going back down, you're going to come back down, and you have to then hold roughly around like 590. So this is a critical moment for the market in terms of continuation. You've made the high. Now you've pushed up again. What are you going to do, right? Frankly, we said it yesterday, because it didn't go down we're talking about the S&P 500, because it didn't go down first, I think you're better off at this point advancing from here. But again, this is very much like a best case scenario. There's really nothing preventing you from coming low and doing a backup for a decent period of time, maybe going again on Monday or something like that. So this week is a bit of a mixed bag in terms of outlook. I can't really say just yet. We did make a higher high. It does seem to be holding support, 595. I mean, it's kind of just hit the target that it was supposed to hit when it first came up before this big backup. And then from here, you're just kind of waiting to see if it has to retrace again, or if it's going to go ahead and push up towards the 608 to 610 area. Market wide, again, I just see kind of a mixed bag of things. Tesla looking kind of mushy this morning. It had very little hope, in my opinion, of running again beyond this, unless it had just a really strong breakout. And so far, all it's doing is widening on the current top. It's a strange one for sure. I think you're getting a decent reset here. And we'll see what happens with the indicators, but it came all the way back down to the lows. And this is, if you recall, when we were first looking at this, we had suggested that this may come back up to the middle, which it did. We looked at it back here around the 23rd. So it's about a week ago. And we said, well, it may come back up towards the middle. and then it's possible it just drops down again and then goes. It went the opposite way, and we actually went all the way to the top, and it not only went to the top, but then it formed like a distributive top where it kind of widened on the top as well. So you can see there's like a micro widening right here as well. So it's just a lot of like, I don't know, little things building out on the edge here that are causing directional change on either side. It's starting to look like this is kind of a version of what we're seeing on the bigger picture, which wouldn't be very bullish, right? The expectation might be that you break down here and go down pretty far. Does Tesla need to break down? Honestly, I think it might, because it's had a good run. There's a last leg here, like I said, maybe up to 400, 405. But if this is like a wave 4, it makes more sense in some ways to just go ahead and break down. And it did. I mean, I guess this is technically corrective since it broke this edge here. And that was Friday into Monday. So yeah, I guess it did already correct a bit. So anywho, it just looks like a hook. Now we're going to see what happens around 318s. If it holds up around 318s, I don't foresee this necessarily being like super bearish. In fact, you can even come all the way up on this side here without actually breaking back into that trend. It could be like a really huge kind of hook motion into the 12th. That being said, Tesla's not really been running with the rest of the market at different times. It's had some pretty different deviations because of what's going on with their CEO and his positioning in the government. And so I don't know what to expect in terms of timing. So I don't know if I would put it in the same basket as the others with this idea of like, oh, it may run up into the 10th. Well, maybe, but it's been pretty different by comparison in terms of timing. So we'll see. I think that at this point it's failed to come up top. So if it does it again, it may only hit like 380. And I wonder if that's enough. You know, I've been looking at this 400, but maybe that 380 is really what's in view here. That would make sense, because if this hits the bottom and it's going to distribute again, come back up to this marker, it could do it there. Like right at the top here, and then really capitulate down. We'll see. We're not there yet. So I'm just kind of waiting. I don't know. I'm not really trading Tesla anyways. I haven't traded it since back here. I missed this run up, but it's mostly because I thought it was going to turn back down, and I wasn't sure what was going to happen in May. When Musk announced that he was coming back, that kind of changed the tide, I think, quite a bit. He was going to come back in May. That obviously like created a pretty huge surge of buyers. So AMD was one that I've been watching. We're just going to kind of scrub through some of these. I still like AMD for some upside here. This is kind of curious. I had made this little diagram earlier that it would jump over, and it didn't happen here. It ended up going down. It kind of went in the middle. If I scoot it over, I think this is still applicable. You would generally see some kind of a backup to find support. The question is, like, where is that support going to be, right? And this is a strange one, because I don't think this is the most consistent. If I have to pick out, you know, what I like in terms of a cross, this is a bit bizarre. But there's a double top here, one on February 19th, the other on the 25th of March. And that goes back to a previous trend. It looks like it goes back quite far. It might even go all the way back to somewhere around 2023. But it certainly seems to be that August drop. It's possible. This goes all the way back to here, to May 2023. Yeah. It's kind of a strange one, though. And I mean that because I think that when you look at this big picture, it wouldn't have been the two that I would have picked out maybe first. I would have picked this top, or this top, this bottom. Or maybe 2023 top to 2024 top right there. But instead, it's like looking at this from a helicopter view. It's like, well, Yeah, I mean that's kind of right, but then it gives you the feeling of like, well, if there's a hook, that's where it would probably be if it has some trouble advancing. I'm starting to see a pretty consistent pattern here on AMD though, which is a good thing because typically like if we have a really obvious drop that wasn't checked, and there is one right here, it's right at 168. That's also the top of this widening down. So as soon as that dropped, it starts this widening build out. Well, a Volkowski pattern analysis of a widening, which is probably the best, a most simple way I should say to do this, would suggest that, well, you're probably going to come back to where that widening began. And that is, of course, up here at 142. So this is not like a surefire play, but it's pretty darn close to one. Because if you look at where that breakdown is here, and you see this as a like a hook value kind of breakdown, there's a huge gap all the way up to 167, and then that's where the drop is as well. So it's clearly establishing like a kind of a I don't know what you want to call it, maybe like a reservoir for liquidity. Like we're going to come back here and check this level, and this would be the previous top bottom. So this is the most logical place right there. So it's almost like a guarantee in some ways. If you can hold this breakout on this widening, you're very likely, there's a much higher probability than not, right? That's what probability is, that you're going to get to that marker. Hey, good morning, Chikachu. It's been a while. I haven't heard from you. So you're more than likely going to get to that marker. So if you ask me, are you bullish on AMD? I've been bullish on it for a while, but it took a long time to kind of find somewhere to stop. And even now I'm like, well, that's not really the highest volume bottom, is it? It could have been significantly greater, and it wasn't for whatever reason. And we are seeing like a diminishing volume as it goes up. I think this is a corrective phase, so on and so forth. But that being said, does it get there in one fell swoop? Probably not. The way that these kind of things typically move is that you would have some kind of a directional trajectory that you could use. Probably just top to bottom is the easiest. Not using like the middle, though that would be like the slowest option. So that's 58 degrees. This is just a wave. It's a V-shaped wave. These kind of recoveries don't always work out, but even if they don't work out perfectly and it's not like the shape of a V, I do typically find that they are fairly accurate in terms of, we can probably get that closer to right exact, like there. It doesn't have to be V-shaped, okay? But the idea is like from bottom to top, no matter what happens here, this could have been a bowl shape for all I care, and it wouldn't have made any difference. I'm still looking at the highest point and the lowest point. So in this case, it does seem to suggest that by August, you're going to be up potentially back towards that 140. So there's a pretty decent chance. And we've been seeing a lot of August, haven't we? A lot of August. That August could be a high point for a lot of tickers. So that makes sense. This August region, we might have a pretty good chance of being back up here. So for now, I think that's a good place to just kind of hang the hat and say, all right, well, between now and then, there's a lot that could potentially happen. We don't know for a fact this is going to form out like a widening on the way up, but it certainly could. And if it did, you've got a lot of space here, going into the end of June to potentially kind of sit and do nothing. I was saying that in terms of like a 5 wave, if this is wave 4 and wave 5 is that roughly equivalent wave 1, then at this point, it hasn't really made like that bigger move down. It doesn't exist yet. If it did, we'd change it. But from where it stands, it could be making a move up to near 137. Now, curiously, there's another kind of a creek body, and I would say there's 2 here specifically, but I would look at this outer one and probably suggest to you that because it's so close to this intersection way out here in August, that this might actually be like a weighted on kind of thing. I don't think it's a it would be unwise, I would say, to say that it has to get there early. That's the sort of the flattest. We can call it a cat ear since there's a double top right here, leaving down. It's that distributive action. That's sort of the widest creek that we have. The next one is from the peak to the outermost point over here. That's also a resistance. You can think of like an imaginary blanket or something that's kind of covering this. And probably a little bit of an arc down, you know what I mean? So we're probably already starting to face that resistance, but we'll be facing it all the way up to 130, for example, on AMD. So when we look at this from that point of view, could it potentially go up to 137? Maybe. You know, it might be more reasonable to suggest that if this does have a fallout and it could go quite low, which I don't see a lot of indication of that right now, but if it did, it went back down to like 101 or something, filled those gaps down there or something like that, then it could go up to like 130, you know, and that would be a wave 5 and it would be done, right? Then you basically be at the top. So there is a certain kind of, I guess you could say like a measurement here of sorts. And I think that was, if I recall, I think I did this earlier. Yeah, I used a Fibonacci on the top to bottom here. That's a 0.5 retracement. It's not exactly like a huge retracement on wave 3. And it could come back as low as potentially even the 618. It's not as likely that happens, but again, wave 4 often is very corrective, so it tends to be like a heavier setting one. I think what would be more likely, and I'd already kind of marked this off, would be to come back down to this 106, 107. So this gives you a really potentially good kind of barometer if it did. Now, the biggest question that I have right now is how could it do that if it's already jumped the creek? Well, that's a good question. I don't think it's very likely that it does. You could have a backup that turns into a kind of spring action in the form of like a creek retest here, because it could come back down below like 108 if it took long enough. You know, if it went into Friday or something like that, you could have a kind of spring action. But even that seems a little unlikely given all of the facts here. So
where's the micro SD card?
it's in the case. Get the case and I'll pull it out for you.
Which one?
The case.
Which one?
The big case. It's it right here.
That's it?
It's inside of here.
Oh.
Bring it over and I'll help you.
It's tiny.
Yeah, bring it on over and I'll help you. Hey, what's up, heel toe?
Which one?
Bring the whole system over. It's going to have to be shut down. It'll turn off. You hear that click sound? Okay. And that one I'm putting in there so we don't lose it.
Put
Okay.
that in the blue thing.
You could put that in the blue thing if it fits, but I don't think it fits.
No, like the little micro SD card.
They have one for it, don't they?
Yeah, the blue thing has like
A little case.
Yeah.
You could. I'm just saying, I'm trying to keep it with something larger because it'd be really easy to lose.
This is big blue and has everything in there.
I know. Does it have a little spot for one?
Yeah, it has a little spot for two.
Okay. You can do that. Yeah. Sorry about that. So I was just helping my kiddo. Summer vacation. So yeah, I don't know. I really like AMD right now. I think that the way that it moved is a little odd to me. I'm not sure I like that it came up first. So curiously, I'm wondering if we get like a run up into, maybe we do get like an early run up here that comes up towards this top into the 9th. but maybe it doesn't like hold up right away. I don't know. There's a lot of things that are like what ifs. Because I could see this having like a second drawback as long as it doesn't make a higher high here. I could see it having like a second pullback. So if it doesn't come above the top, if it only hits like 122 or something, and it doesn't come above like that 122.50, this could have like another drawdown. And I could definitely see it coming all the way down to the bottom again and testing these levels here. So that wouldn't really surprise me actually. This could be like an auto reaction and a phase B top. So if it does like an auto reaction and a phase B top here and doesn't back up, you could have a phase B top and then come down and start forming out it probably end up being right here, like a spring action, because they would use the ice level there as like a resistance on the way down, and that would build out like a phase B. So this is just a back test essentially on the bottom. And that would be an opportunity to have a phase B bottom that then goes into a spring. So I don't know what would cause this to happen. I'm just thinking about it in terms of a range. That would actually be fine. And then you could come back down and hit below that 107, probably go towards that gap, 106. Curiously, again, that's sort of like the outermost mark that I have. And I don't even know where this came from, looking at it now. Maybe it has something to do with extended hours. Not really sure why I have that over there. Oh, that's the trajectory. Well, yeah, that could make sense. Because in a wave down, if they broke this bottom and it doesn't jump right back up into it, that's the difference right here. It's like if this jumps right back up into it and goes into an SOS, it probably just goes. But if it doesn't, then what I think is that, oh, I see why that's there. What I think is that this actually could be like a 50-50 across. So if you turn this into a cross is what I call it, where it breaks through it. So it had a little weakness, came back up, and then broke down through it. If it fails to advance here, then this becomes like a 50-50 when you jump over the middle, and actually looks pretty darn perfect, y'all, to get you to that trajectory. So that would be the place you could put it and have like a really deep retracement. Actually looks pretty close to right here. Now that's still bullish. The weird thing about it, of course, being that it would take a longer route to get there and stuff. It can't go over that top. It has to be able to like kind of relax. I say it can't go over the top, but that's really just Wyckoff rules. Sometimes it breaks rules, but this would make sense to me if this was what happens. That you could have like a dip here. Frankly, because this is just a trajectory, I don't really see why you couldn't even just go into like a full-on spring. It's curious. It does make you wonder. That's starting to look like it's really close to July. Maybe it just takes the whole time to get down there, and who knows, you know? I don't necessarily think the gap fill is that important, but that's very slow. But this would make sense to me. And then you could have a really big rally move, maybe going into that July deadline. That could be your wave 5. So there's a lot of options here, but this is one to watch in my opinion. If you've not traded it before, I'm trying to give like a very basic overview of what I think would be likely here. But yeah, that to me seems very probable. It's not that expensive to trade if you can trade options. It's $100 a share, 110 a share, whatever, 117 right now. But options are pretty cheap on it for the most part. And it has good return if it makes the right moves. So this is one way that I would expect it to potentially move if it doesn't break this top. So we're going to have to watch this pretty carefully, I think. In fact, I'm actually going to put it right on that, or right below that, right at like 121. Because I need to see if it gets up there. I need to see, because I might have to exit and re-enter if it drops through. So I genuinely think if it drops down here, it's kind of a mixed bag. You could have just like a backup, I guess. You could just have like a quick backup and like run up. That'd be like an LPS where it just doesn't go low again. That only happens if there's like a lot of buyers. But even that, it still goes down. You come back down to this level right here. And then still have to break the top. So it's like, there's not really a lot of variation here. That looks like a lot, but it's not. Because if it's really only two things to begin with, which is it breaks or it doesn't break, this high. And then it's, where does the backup occur? And I don't see anything on RSI that's really giving it away right now. It broke out from this little micro downtrend, which is like a flag. I don't know. It's just a very like tenuous situation, I guess. There's a lot of potential there. So yeah, this morning I was talking about AMC when we first jumped on the stream, and we have pretty low numbers today, but that's expected because my stream's been crapping out. And when things aren't happening, people don't tend to come around as much, which is fine. My stream was really dying. It died 2 times. It's last 2 times I've streamed. It's had a crash. And what happens is that it starts just not connecting to the YouTube servers. I don't know why. Sometimes I think it's YouTube, but I think a lot of it has to do with just internet connection and whatnot. So, or maybe even my computer like running out of memory or something. I don't know. Video RAM, I don't know. There's something going on where the stream just kind of craps out. And I try to reset it, but if it doesn't reset within like, it resets like once every 8 seconds or something, and then I can manually reset it. I changed it today to once every 5 seconds for a longer duration, like so there's more reset attempts. But once it starts resetting, YouTube times you out. If you don't have it within about 30 seconds, if you don't fix it, it just kills the stream. So if I can get it started again quickly, the stream can continue. But lately, that's not been the case. So, yeah. So it just died, and then I wasn't even able to even after that, I wasn't able to get it to work. So I did a reset on everything. I changed all of the connection parameters and stuff. Hey, quiet. She's not listening. She's being really noisy. So I changed all the connection parameters, and hopefully that helps. No, I wasn't rage quitting. I don't do that. I've never done that. So if that ever happens, I'm not rage quitting. I'm not. That'd be funny, but I don't do that. So you're just gonna have to trust me on that, I guess, because you can't really know what's going on behind the scenes. But the like I said, I use OBS, which is the best thing I can use, and I don't know. Last 2 streams have died, so I'm hoping today is different. Anyways, so what we talked about at AMC yesterday was this dip down to like the 320s. I said I didn't necessarily think it had to fill the gap, but I went ahead and just put it there. And then I wanted to see it kind of build out and break out around 331. We're getting a little bit of an influx of volume coming off 330, which is good. The next thing that has to happen, though, is it needs to change direction. So it has to come above 340. If you get an advancement above 340 here, then there's a chance that you make a higher low, and you've, of course, at that point advanced. Until that happens, we can't really say, because this could just be an auto reaction. An auto reaction is exactly what it sounds like. When you hit a low, that's a support. There's a reactive, buy-in. buyers come back in, they try to like push it back up. They try to stop an advancement of sellers, so on and so forth. An auto reaction is almost impossible to call an auto reaction until you see what happens after, because in some cases you think it's the bottom and it's really just an LSPY, last point of supply, meaning that it's like the opposite of a last point of support, where you're really just kind of creating a flag or something. This is one of those situations that is like that, because you have back here a already established bottom at 333. You can see, and I'm just highlighting it. I'm not going to keep this on the chart, but I'm highlighting it green here. That technically could just be like a hook, right? We could be just doing an LSPY, which is like a last point of supply before a drop. So in order to kind of prove that that's not what this is, in order to say like this is indeed a shallow S curve, we need to see a change of character. We have to see it come above 340. So if you're tracking with me on that, and I think most of you probably can pretty easily track with me on that, we do this quite a bit. This has to advance over 340. When it comes back down, at that point, you have to make a higher low. Ideally, it doesn't go back below, like I said, 331. That could be like a double dip beneath 333. That's possible. But ultimately, like, it has to hold a higher low and then advance above this creek, which was established on the false break of the previous creek. Okay, there's a lot going on here, right? Yeah. So the reason I was saying I thought this was more likely a shallow S curve has to do with the overall picture and what I think might be going on into this this June 9th to 10th date, that we're probably going to get a secondary motion back up. That's a big picture analysis. When you look at it on the micro, though, there's a ton of stuff that has to happen here, right? And what I said before is still true, that if this comes down and hits, and it did happen, so you got to remember, this is not just like a gap fill, okay? If you just see a gap fill and you think that that's the reason it's going to run, you're kind of missing something here. Because what else happened? We talked about this before. What else happened was that this actually has a weakness, like an SOW. So it's a spring of sorts, in that it has this kind of dip below. Just like back here, there were 2 points of contact. We created this uptrend. It dips below that first point of contact, the first 2 points, and then it goes the other way. Well, that's we would call a spring to some degree, right? But I also have to say that that is a sign of weakness, which means that the next time it comes back here, this trend is very unlikely to hold. Very unlikely to hold. And so even if you wanted to, and you can, and you probably should, expand this outward just to have it as an extra trend, it's important to note that, like, because this punctured it once, when you come back down again, this is you have to consider this an SOW. Like this trend, this white trend that I just kind of moved up here, and I'm using this as an example, the next time it comes down through here, it's very likely going to break through it. Very likely. So that means that when and if this is correct, and I don't know if it's going to be correct, but if this is correct, next time it comes back down through that marker, maybe I have it at 318 or something. I think it's going to line up with this level here at 318. When it comes back down through that marker, I think it's going to be around there, and that it's going to break through it. Probably create a new weakness on the bottom trend. Again, 1, 2 points, and then the third point breaks. This is the same thing that's happening right now. So if you look at this and you take a look at the 2 bottoms, this is a dip, and that's important to note. Could it be likened to a spring? Well, yeah. The secondary action right now could definitely be that buy-in, right? The primary action, though, is the drop of that trend. And if you get that buy-in and that support, and what I was suggesting is that, again, it has to come above 340. You do not have confirmation right now, because this auto reaction may not be done. And if this auto reaction doesn't come back up and breach the top at some point and go above, there's no change in direction. I am very optimistic that there will be. That's why I've drawn this out on the chart. So when I look at this, I'm like, yeah, pretty sure that this could be a shallow S curve and it bounces out. But A, you need to come over 340. B, you need to come over 362. Non-negotiables. If you're a confirmation-based trader, which you should be, I think everybody should be or strive to be, because that tells you from a technical standpoint, if you're on this channel and you're listening to me as a technical trader, there's no reason to not think about confirmation. That's silly. You should be looking at 340 and 362 as confirmations of upside, because those would give you directive. And then in addition to that, you want to be paying very, very close attention to where those pullbacks go. If this doesn't go over the top, for example, and then the pullback comes down and makes a lower low, that's a big deal. That's a SOW, right? You can't have an auto reaction that makes a lower low and call it anything else. Anytime there's an auto reaction and then it immediately makes a lower low, mark it off, and it will be a high volume auto reaction that then comes down a lower volume and actually makes an advancement for this bear side. That's not a good thing long term, because typically that's going to denote, oh, you're going to come back later. So the fact that this hit this marker, I don't know what to make of that, other than like it just went to exactly where I thought it was going to go. It's not a hard call out. It was really just pointing it to that gap. But we specifically looked at some levels yesterday, and I kept them on the chart, like 331, 333, things like that we were looking at. And we were saying 331 is a likely candidate for a massive 50-50 turn later. So I think that we're going to look at this as a potential anchor point in the future right here. Anyways, so what do you make of this as a SOW then, Booksy? Not a lot. I think I already have the marker on the chart, so it's done. Like, that's all I needed to have. It just so happens that I already have it, right? Because I did it yesterday, and I guess I was right about exactly where it came to, which is strange. I've already said that. It's very strange. But that marker right there is correct. So this is already an SOW. It's pointing down. You might say, well, I don't know why it would be an SOW. We took off from, the same place that it came back to. It's not like we made like a lower low here. We made a higher low. Why did you call this an SOW? Just remember, it's a shallow S curve. So it's still bouncing out, building a support, distributing, and then pushing down lower. And if you want to go from that particular point of view, this actually has made 3 consecutive lows here. That's not exactly like strength. It doesn't mean it couldn't have stopping power. Sometimes you're just kind of waiting to get to the final spot. But typically that's going to denote that you've got some serious weakness. And not only that, but then it broke the uptrend. That's why I would consider this an SOW. Later, these two become key players, in my opinion. One is previous top to bottom. The other is just the triple bottom down. These become key players later. Like, mark my words on that. I try not to be too like literal with things all the time, but if this comes back down, I guarantee you these two lines are going to be used. May even be that that's where the bottom is, right here in this pocket, which is very possible. We talked about, 338 is kind of the bare minimum, or 238 is kind of the bare minimum. But look at where that is in comparison to where August is on the 6th and 7th. We're right in that pocket. 226, anyone? Remember 226? That was the variable shift value for equivalency to $1. Those are things that I would not bat an eye at. If it came back down, I'd be like, yeah, all right, that makes sense. It should do that. And not only that, but I think the next time it comes down, very similarly, you probably have a similar SOW structure here that points towards some bottom. I don't think it necessarily has to go, I've said this before, down to like $1.90. I think that's kind of, it's there, but I feel like it's a bait. It's like a carrot on a stick. Because in 2020 into 2021 run-up, there was a similar carrot on a stick, but it never gets there. The price action doesn't come back that low. The price action stops just below the bottom. The on-balance volume matches that carrot on the stick. It does go as low as it needs to go. And it gets there, but the price action just doesn't. It just doesn't get there. It never gets to the creek. That's really important to note. So I don't think it's necessarily going to happen. If this hits 226 and it ends up bouncing from that point, I'm never going to take crap from anybody ever again on this channel. There are very few people that give me a hard time. There's not that many of you. But I'd be like, well, there it is, right? We were right to use those valuations. This is still a sign of weakness. So I need to emphasize that because the next time it comes down and it hits this red trend, it's probably going to break it. All right. And that could happen after hitting 460. That could happen after hitting 540. But it also could happen after hitting like 390, and our expectations need to be in line with reality, not with what we want to have happen. If this is a high probability target, great, keep it on the chart. But if something changes here and this drops back through, I'm not going to be like sugarcoating it saying, oh, it's going to go up again. That's going to be it for me. Like I'm going to say, yeah, it's probably done. So you have to understand, like, that's the reason this is so important. What just happened? It's a snowball effect, right? And then likewise, the next trend up, which is the white line, same deal. Once again, it's probably going to break down. I genuinely think that's part of the operator plan for AMC when they develop these trends and such, and for any stock for that matter. They see the same pattern on all kinds of parabolic moves. And then later it comes down and it kind of walks through these levels again and checks them all. These established trends that you thought were going to hold forever and then they don't, right? And they've already given you weaknesses. They've already done Mark 1, Mark 2 here. So these are setups that pretty traditional, pretty simple, and I think that they are easy enough to read because we just have to kind of watch now the micro. We already know the big picture, like, okay, sign of weakness there, sign of weakness there. They are springs, so don't hear me wrong. Like, they are spring actions, but then the next time it comes back there and tests it, if it breaks, it's done, right? That's going to give us a really easy way to understand market price movement after a big push up if it happens here. So in the meantime, I'm going to say this is a bit of a nothing just for now until we see that maybe that support and the push above 340. Once we see that push above 340, I'll be a little bit more like, all right, let's do this thing on AMC. For now, I'm just going to kind of wait. I don't really want to see it make another low. Double bottom is acceptable. It's not the best. I'd prefer for it to make a higher low at this point. So we'll see. All right, so Dan has a question here. Thank you. Appreciate you saying that. If AMC makes this move up by next week to the levels you called out, do you expect GME to make it 30%? Yeah. Yeah. They're basically the same. So another way to interpret this, although maybe it's not the easiest way to do it in this particular case, is a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And previously we had thought because of the iterations that 5 was actually maybe a bigger wave, and that's still possible. I think it's going to be a little bit larger than 1 because, again, previously we kind of looked at this and we found that the wave 5 on the micro seemed to be connected with this burst. And that's a little confusing if you don't accept the idea of iteration expansion here, because it would be like saying you're seeing like a nested 5 wave and then another nested 5 wave within that nested 5 wave and then another nested 5 wave within that nested 5 wave, so on and so forth down to the smallest picture. But I noted that 3 was pretty big, but then it seemed like 5 was actually the next 3. Does that make sense? So like wave 5 on the smallest picture was like the next wave 3 on the next step up. And then the next wave 5 on that picture was the next wave 3 on the step up. So at this point, though, we've kind of gotten to the final iteration. There's really nothing else. This could have been it. And I've said that before, like, I'm not really sure, 1,000% sure. I can't be. This could have been it. This could have been the last one because I knew it was going to very likely get to that $4 target. It had to get to 360 to 430 at least, that range. But $4 was kind of the critical target point, 406 to be more precise. That was kind of all I had measured out to. And then when we looked at what happened on the breakout on the last one, I noted that it was extended and it went to a different variable. And I thought that was kind of curious. And it didn't have the backup either that the earliest wave had. So as a result, I'm thinking that there might be an even bigger wave here, weirdly enough, that's going to try to be met, like a macro kind of bigger one. It's not exactly ideal, just to be clear. Like coming back to 461 is great. It gives us evidence again of a repeat with 2020. But if you were just to kind of look at the big picture, is this a back test of that top or that floor? Yeah, it is. 461 was a more sured support, and we mentioned that I said it yesterday. I'm not going to repeat everything. I'm going to get to the GME question in just a second because you asked me about GME. But this is the more assured support. Like it's the one that was the most often there on the PNF chart that we did. There wasn't another one. All of the bottoms, all the other bottoms except 460, they almost don't even register on the PNF, which means that PNF is about, it's point and figure. It's about how frequently and how long you stay in a range. And then it's really more about, like less about time, I should say. I'd say how long. That doesn't really make sense because it's not really about time. I got that a little backwards. It's sort of about movement within a range and the shifting that happens and where do the shifts happen. And you can have like incremental shifts, like how big is the shift? Well, it has to be a 10-cent shift or something, or a 15-cent shift in order to register. And so it really is a measurement of incremental shifts. It's a weird way to look at the chart, but it is a very effective way to find actual resistances and supports. And all the numbers that we found, and there were a lot of great numbers on here, 430, 485, 550s. Those are great numbers. They're there. Of all of the ones that we found, though, 460 was actually the one that came up the most often on every variable time frame that we picked, every variable incremental picture we picked, I should say increment. So not time. So I would not be surprised if 460 was indeed like the actual kind of liquid target here. The reason I said I don't necessarily think it's ideal is because that's a huge move off the bottom, right? And then that kind of puts into question like, well, how big is this move going to be down? And it does make it seem quite dramatic. I mean, you can move really far, potentially, but I think that on the whole, my bigger question has still been about on balance. And on balance didn't make the advancement. So when we got to $4, I was like, oh, well, that's weird. When you go to the on balance volume, it doesn't even have the advancement. It's not there. So this is the on balance on the 4 hour. And I thought that was really curious. It's just not there. Like, it actually is still dropping, it looks like. It looks like it lost there. So that's also an SOW. Yep. So it dropped through right there. See that weakness? On balance now has an SOW right here. That's super important to note. So it hit twice, and then the third time it broke down. So if it comes back through it again, it's going to probably break down. But what was important to note about this was that it wasn't advancing as far as we thought it would advance. We thought at this point it may need to be all the way up here. I made a case that, well, in some ways it wouldn't matter because you could probably achieve what you wanted to achieve. I think the on-balance goal here is the 12 to 18 million region on the 4 hour. I'm not going to flinch about that. I'm going to stay the course on that. I did a ton of research on it and looked into why that might be the case. I know that on-balance volume is more about direction than the actual numbers. I'm aware of that. But I'm also aware that there's a pattern that's appeared frequently on AMC. And that is that the breakdown target, that waveform, that development, it comes back there to the initial portion of where it first broke down. And that was back in September, early September, late August 2023, right after the reverse split. So the reason that's important is because when you do the comparison to 2020, there's actually a massive hike in on balance volume in that final push. And that's not the push that breaks you out. That's the thing. That's the push that takes you up and then drops you into a spring. And that's the argument that's been made. But this is not the case for GME. And when we get to the GME chart in just a second, I just want you to recall, like, that's not exactly what we see on GameStop. It doesn't have that same kind of bump and then giant drop into a spring. And so there could be some variable differences, some considerable differences in the movement. But, however, where does that happen, right? And in the case of GameStop, it's already in a bullish run by the time AMC is dropping in 2021. And I don't see anything inconsistent with what we're seeing now. GME is in a situation where it could probably have a pretty deep retracement and still make a push going into August without having the same kind of massive spring action beforehand. And I made that case yesterday because someone asked me about, I think they asked me about like Nick P or somebody, some other YouTuber or whatever, saying they thought that GME is going to go all the way down to 17. And I said, well, if they're 1-to-1, then yeah, that's possible because that's the spring zone locally for GME. But I don't think that they're going to necessarily be 1-to-1. In fact, I would suggest that if it happened that way, it kind of creates a whole litany of problems for GME that long term it builds out very awkwardly. So we redid the chart on GME to reflect not a drop here, which was always possible, by the way. You know, I've had this on the chart for quite a while, since back in like February, this S-curve down. And it's based on the macro S-curve down, right? And the idea that this is essentially like the middle of a cat ear, and then this is also the middle of a cat ear. And then this is also the middle of a cat ear. Like it's a iterative model. So lest you think I'm copying anybody, I'm not. I've had it on the chart for a long time. And I think y'all know that. But this kind of a setup could yield some really bad results if it drops back below 24. And the idea that it just hits that and recovers, I would put that into question because the idea of that then turns into this really bizarre expansion where this kind of pops again, maybe back to 50 and then drops all the way down. Because from an iteration standpoint, why not? If you went back to this top and then dropped really, really low, why would you not also come back to this top and drop really, really low? So the behavior model there kind of shifts. And some of you might say, well, maybe the behavior is just to do that on the small scale, not to do that on the large scale. Okay, but now we're just speculating. Like all we can do is kind of look at the evidence of what's being presented and say, this is the way it's trading on the micro and the macro, and it's consistent. And you see these things build out usually consistently. So there's all kinds of little questions. In the end, we'll have the answers. It's a very difficult one for me personally, and I tried on GameStop to do it, and I hurt my head. Like at some point I was like, I don't think I can do it. So when we first did it, I was doing this kind of expansion model thing, and it's really challenging. It's kind of like the question of like, well, if this goes up, then what happens on the bigger picture? Does it have another backup and then just go up again? And that's what causes these big run-ups. It's like you start seeing that capitulation, that snowball, and things start advancing. The reason I'm kind of bringing that up right this second is because I forgot about this chart. I have another one too. When you look back at what happened in the 2020 markup, after it makes the low and then it breaks out, there's this kind of buy up period and then it jumps again and it goes over the creek, so on and so forth. But there's a double creek jump, right? It's a pretty classic Wyckofian range. There's not really much to be complicated here. It's like this is a reaction and a phase B top all at once, and then there's a phase B bottom, a spring. It jumps the creek. Doesn't advance over the top yet. This is just an LPS. It's kind of a backup to the creek, and then it just advances, right? And it goes into an SOS and leaves. It hits the top. Hits the sign of strength, consolidates right there for a second, and then leaves. And I made note that this is the precise moment and we've talked about it frequently, that AMC goes into a spring. But we already know that if this is the case, that this is already, essentially this has already happened. This area right here in September of 2020 is the equivalent, supposedly, if we're talking about dynamics, this is the kind of the equivalent of December 2026 in that regard. I don't think it's the equivalent of now. So there's a question mark there where you have, maybe to some degree, you have a little bit of, I don't know why I did that. I meant to do this. Hit the wrong button. A question of like, well, where does this happen, right? Well, remember, if this is like your September day and you're going to have this really long-winded downside, which is happening, and you don't break out here, and you just have an advancement that's just going back to check the previous area, you can't use just the September date. You have to also use the next one up. So again, this is September back here, 2020. Very different than what's going on in GME. GME is like breaking out here. But that's part of the reason is because the COVID drop happened as a spring for GME. This kind of starts the range for AMC. So they're completely different in that regard. But there's a second kind of push up here, which is November in 2020 into December of 2020. And that area right here is really that reactive peak where you have this massive, massive on balance volume. And I have to kind of scale the chart because it's changed so much. But you have this huge hike in on balance volume here. And this is essentially what I'm saying, was just saying that I thought was going to happen. And then you're going to have this huge drop that goes back to the reset point, right, on a spring, okay? Well, during this time period, it's like, why does this happen here? It's kind of a weird spot. Maybe it's the elections, and that's all there is to it. Maybe it's because of earnings. We look at November 20th going through like December 10th on GME. It's pretty different. November 20th on AMC, or excuse me, on GME is kind of like the middle of this M cross, and then it goes into the December 10th. It's not particularly interesting. You could probably see some similarity with this 1, 2, and then 3, 4, if you want to, from September. I think this would be a bit challenging to try to like 1-to-1 with AMC, but that's what's going on at GME, and this is the time period right here, this breakout into November 20th. It does hit a peak, and then it has a reaction going into December, but it's pretty different than what we see over here, right? Like pretty darn different. So the comparisons kind of fall short. So when I look at what we're seeing right now on GME, the question of like, well, does it also go up? I don't know if that's the right question. The question should be not necessarily, because again, we can see that the models were distinctly different. I just showed you in terms of like what might happen. So it's not necessarily, does this go up and then drop to 17? It's really a question of like, where can this go without breaking down? And could it be similar to what happened back here as opposed to just, it's going to do what AMC's doing or whatever, which would be a spring action. And the short answer is, I think if you look at it by itself, it's pretty simple. And this is what I came up with, is that, yeah, this could technically drop down pretty low right now. It'd go to like 26 or something, or 27. Maybe not 26, that's pretty low, but like 27. And we could go down back to that bottom almost on a full throwback. But if it advances over the top, it's a clear and clean 50-50 up to like 45. That's a 40% to 50% run, which is essentially the exact same as what we're seeing on AMC. It's another like 40 to 50% here to get back up to like even the highest point, but even just coming from this low to 460, that's like 40%. So both could have that push, but then what happens after that, I think you have to just kind of look at those comparisons and say like, well, both have that push here. They would kind of be looking at this guy as the main lead indication. And like what happens after this is it just kind of bounces out and then starts advancing into August. And that's what we're starting to see potentially here for GME. So it would be like this guy, essentially. Maybe it comes back that low, But this would be the best comparison right here, right? Is to say, well, I don't actually think it comes all the way back down to 17. I think it probably comes back down. It would need to come back and retest the creek jump here, especially if it has a sudden burst. And I've got this going out to June 30th, but for all we know, this could be like a really fast move on the 9th, the week of the 9th. This is a weekly chart, I think. Yeah, this is a long-term chart. So you could have a really quick move over the course of a week up to there. I mean, it'd be insane. But that would basically be your June squeeze, so to speak. And then the backup period could be more long-winded going into near August. And then you could do the similar kind of like jump up and move going into September. That would be consistent with what we're seeing on AMC, which is there's a likelihood that we get back to this breakout point and we get back to that curve again, September 6th. I said early September, late August. That's consistent. So this idea of like an August squeeze seems to follow through quite neatly on GME, with the caveat that we don't really know how far this comes back, so on and so forth. So the reason that I don't like assuming that GME is going to come down, even though, yeah, it could go up again for sure, is it doesn't really play into its own narrative very well. If you start doing that, it generates this big question mark of like, if this comes down to 17 and needed the spring and needs the liquidity to come back here, and ultimately is going back to retest this big creek, why are we not going to go back and retest the next big creek? And there's no answer. The answer is that, well, we should then, right? If that was necessary here, if it's necessary to come down to 17, which again, there's an S-curve there. It's been there for a while. That doesn't mean it has to be taken, right? If this is necessary to come back to 17, not only have you lost now that, and I would have to defer to the other chart because you're basically going to lose what we were talking about as like the ice and the creek. Not only will you have lost the ice and the creek, it then demands the next question, which is, hey, if I lose this ice here, which has already had a weakness and it can't hold, so this is not a spring that leads to like a big push. Instead, it's like a spring that leads to kind of a double flush where it's like a 1-2 and then down again. Why would it come back up? And I don't have a good answer. It makes it seem like kind of backwards, almost like an inverted motion. Because if this drops low, then the question of like, well, what would cause this at this point to then spring? I don't know. You'd be like, well, yeah, you just said it was like the spring zone, right? So why can't that be a spring? Question marks, You have an auto reaction already, right? If you could try to create like a phase B top or whatever, fine. You can have a spring there. We've looked at the Cattier monk function with a spring. But then it has to come back above in July. It'd have to come back above and going into August 25 again. So then there's this question of like, what happens if it doesn't get above? Like this is the snowball is what I was talking about. That's why I didn't really want to. I don't think that it's that complicated right now. I think what you should just focus on is whether or not it breaks down beneath this kind of like 25. Really, it depends on when it gets there, but I guess this region right here around 25.50 is very critical. If it can hold above there, I don't see why it doesn't just continue to try to advance like it did in 2020. And it does get this squeeze motion up. This motion right here is already then playing into its own iteration, which appears here. And that's what I was trying to get at with this particular mock-up was that, well, in this case, if it does go up again and it hits like $80, no, it's not all-time highs, but at the very least, it's consistent with its own behavior pattern of breakout, have a backup period, and then jump, and then go down. Now, that does mean you go down later, but it happens in the correct order where this goes up and distributes again and then comes down in a grander fashion after an August push-up. I think this is fairly consistent. Now, some people are going to look at this and say, well, yeah, but right here, why would it stop at 80? Because in 2020 or whatever, this goes all the way up and it breaks above all-time highs. It does. But remember, we're talking about possibility here. We're not talking about like guarantee. And really what we're looking at is like, does the expansive model fit the bill? And it does. If you create this secondary motion here, you've got now a creek coming down. A backup here would be the place to have it. And if you need to spring, you're going to come back down pretty low by June. And then you have essentially a 2026 launch post that goes ridiculously high, at least to all-time highs, then potentially higher. The other place it could happen is in August, and I do think it's not impossible. It could happen here. This kind of leads to bigger question marks. You know, we have to kind of look at this and say, well, if this goes up high, why didn't this go up again and do like the same thing, you know, on the big picture? And I'm saying, well, I think it does on the big picture. I'm just curious about when it does, so on and so forth. All right. I don't necessarily think that anybody's particular interpretation of this has got to be wrong. I agree with the 17 level. I agree that this could hit all-time highs for sure. I'm curious to see how it gets there. If you drop here, this is the question mark that I'm trying to present. If you drop here, yeah, like you could have a change of character and something could happen, I guess. And some people are going to say, well, you're just overcomplicating it. If it hits the spring and it goes, who cares? I care, because what I've noticed is that in the market, this tends to be fairly consistent. And if this ends up creating this kind of double top motion and then drops all the way back down, I just don't see how that's anything less than like a premonition almost of like the bigger picture. Like, why is there a liquidity crisis here at this particular time? I don't know. And some people are going to say, well, it has to do with market cap, so on and so forth. It's fairly indecisive. I read one article the other day that said its market cap should be like $40. I read another one that says it's really still way overvalued. There's a huge spread on analyst, humongous on this ticker. And a lot of it has to do with what you think about the idea of like a Bitcoin investment. And what a lot of people have pointed out, I think it's true, is that that's not a business. It's a business strategy, but it doesn't ultimately, if you think about it, it's very separate from the GameStop business by itself. It'd be easy to kind of ignore it and say, well, that's not ultimately what saves the company. What saves the company is reinventing it, or, you know, fixing the balance sheet and all this other stuff. It's a big question mark, right? So like me investing money doesn't change how I'm spending money. It doesn't change what my business is actually doing. It's just an investment, you know. And it's like what AMC did with the gold mine. You know, it didn't ultimately make any real serious difference, apparently, because it's not changing like the fundamentals of the business. I think that's the reason why these analyst targets are so different. But I'm just saying, like, I have this feeling that like if it drops here and it has a problem, I don't see why it has this liquidity problem here, and it's because the sellers are in force. I don't see why you don't just do it again, because you have this sort of, then you have like a precedence here to have this kind of breakdown and come back down to the next floor, which would be back here. It's just a iterative sequence of events, and that's pretty dramatic, I know. But ultimately, like, that's very dramatic, but it's like, well, why not? I don't see why not. They'll never do that. Whatever. I don't care what you think it can or can't do, right? People say that kind of stuff all the time on here, and I'm like, it's whatever, dude. There's a clear trend. There's a clear pathway to the upside. I think $80 is a very conservative outlook in terms of like pushing it and really pushing it. I'm not going to say all-time highs, even though, yes, some people have asked, they said, well, what happened to the 1-2? It's not gone. I don't get rid of ideas just because I find something that is compelling. This is compelling to me because it works very well. When I took it back to the macro, I took that expansion here of what was happening, applied it to the big picture. It actually worked very, very well to get you up to the top in sort of a macro distribution action before a really long distribution phase, probably that lasts for 3 to 4 years, just like this one did. So this is still like all upside, you know. It's just a matter of like how it happens, right? And I may not be 100% right about everything, but like it's a good markup if it works. So like if a mock-up, I mean. So if this ends up, and all I did was take those iterations and match the levels proportionally on each breakout, it worked. And I'm like, yeah, it's effective. It's certainly an avenue that an algorithmic operator could take to achieve this outcome, which means I think it's legitimate. Does that mean that the idea of this pumping into August and then having a second run going into February is out of the question? Well, no, but it's got to do mostly with what happens here, right, on this walkout. And it's not that complicated. It really isn't. If it holds certain things, it's going to be just fine. It holds around like the $60 level right here. Why not go again? That's different than what I've got on this example, which is clearly like a breakdown through there. Well, I just want to be able to buy something and make $1 billion and just know it's going to go. Don't we all? Join the boat, like join the bandwagon. I don't know, man. We all want that. Everybody wants that. Everybody wants to say it's definitely going to do this. I just want to be like the roaring kitty guy and just get in down here and know it's going to go, and all those people or I've already done that and I'm just waiting for it to do it again. And okay, like everybody wants that, dude. I don't know what to tell you. If I could choose to see the future and know exactly what's going to happen, I would. But I can't. So instead, we have to look at confirmation levels. So I think there's going to be a spot here. And again, like I don't throw it out just because I find something else. There's still very clear evidence to me anyways that there's a potential for a February 2026 run. And that has to do with this S-curve. And one argument for that would be that if this goes up again here, then you're really kind of making the same punctual argument here. The one thing that's the most confusing, and I still think this is very confusing, the only thing that's not really working with that in my mind is this guy right here. What happened in March going into April in GME is very odd. It's not what I would have expected. And I don't know what to make of it yet. It changed some things. It just did. Everything else has been fairly easy to read. This is technically just like a cat ear with a jump. I mean, it made the jump, so it could hold. It has to make the advancement over the top. That's a given. So it needs to make the advancement back over 35. But it could be a very simple like cat ear markup where it's jumping up, and then it goes. This is problematic because it came down and it makes a higher high here, but it broke the ice, which is very strange. I have to just kind of hit the period button and move on, right? Hit the period key and move on. Because I don't understand why it would do that completely. Some people will say, well, it's just a spring action or this or that or reset. I don't know, man. I don't know. Is it a timing thing? Was there a reason that we needed to do that earlier now? Was there a change of character in that we wanted to go ahead and take it down and get out of a position, like get out of a short position, for example? If there was a short changing their mind about direction, was it a bull operator who wanted to sell and take it down and buy again? There's all kinds of question marks. I just have no answer. Okay. So I find that to be very curious. If it had not happened that way and we had just gotten that markup here, I don't think I would be questioning as much. I don't think I would be giving this as much consideration because it still was following what would have been expected of a sort of a cat ear walkout. Granted, we still need to have the support in the next break. That's not happened yet, but it's still there. So the idea of this being like, oh, well, it just jumps up and goes up and just keeps going, I don't think it's way out of the question. But the problem is that this drops really, really low. And it did ultimately come all the way back to where this broke out. And that leads us to this question mark of, are we going to come all the way back down to where this broke out, which is like 17? That's what happened here. It just does a full retracement back down. Well, we came pretty close to that already. We already hit like 18. Don't overthink it, yada, yada, yada. I can't not see it. So if there's an opportunity here to sort of make a point, I guess what I would say is that the point is the way in which these iterations kind of unfold will be progressive, and as they move forward, you just have to take note of what's changed. I think that's a bit of a change. I'm not sure what it means just yet. I just know it's a little different than what was expected. And as a result, I have to just be careful, and think it through. And that's all. That's all there is to it for now. But could this still potentially build out? Yeah, I mean, again, if that hadn't happened and it had walked out, I would look at the big picture and just think, well, it's going to walk out the same way. It doesn't necessarily need to back up every time really far because it's not doing that. And eventually it kind of squeezes up and then it has some big pull down. So is this still a possible chart? Yeah, we see that on the micro as well. Like this build out here does have a good advancement, So you could see how this would like layer itself up. If this is the break of the big creek and it's pushing and then advancing over the top and then it holds the support and goes again to the next top, then that's essentially the build out, right? Then you've got the next layer up, which is the same thing. It's advancing over the top here, jumps the creek, just like this jumps the creek. And then it goes up, creates a top, and then it advances back over that top, right? Well, there you have it, Booksy. It's going to do it. Yeah, but the problem being is this came down really low, and that throws me off because I'm like, I don't know what to make of that. Because this hasn't done that on the bigger picture. Does that make sense? That's the question mark. I don't know the answer to. And that's why I'm like curious if we see that drop, does it change everything else? And I think it would. If we see this dip happen here down to like 17, I think it dramatically changes everything else into this weird, like huge flushing mechanism of ups and downs. It's possible. So like this would be kind of the way I would view it, right? Is like at some point this would come back above the previous top. Now the good news is that in both of these cases, I think you can make a pretty strong argument that it is going to try to come back up to that $85 mark. And that is evidenced here in the small picture on this S-curve as it is on the big picture on this S-curve. So that's no different than we're seeing here. Again, what's the only possible change? Well, the only possible change is if it drops back below that value that we were talking about earlier, because then we're implying that we need to go down to the previous floor before we get that reaction. And things get really complicated really fast. And then we're going to make a huge spring, and we have to make this we may make a huge spring, I should say. We have to kind of make that work out. It's like, I don't know how. There's only two options. And one is it does this kind of magic, humongous double flush, like it pops way up to above here and then drops all the way back down, which is crazy. And then the other is that, well, instead it just has like a kind of a weak August run and then it drops back down, and that follows through pretty neatly. And then it does the reset here, just like it did the reset here, and that's all there is to it. This is a pretty classic and traditional cat ear with a breakdown with a hook, right? It's a dramatic hook, but it's just a hook. It's fairly normal, actually. It's very similar to what we saw in AMC too recently. It doesn't go back up to the top until way later, which again, it's confusing at first until you think about it as like, well, this guy resets all the way down. Then you have all these other question marks. That's what I'm saying. Like this brings about a lot of questions that just don't even make any sense. Like, why would you do this? Why would you come all the way down to like 10 and then go all the way back up to the top and then come all the way back down to spring? I mean, that's just ridiculous. That's insane. And it almost makes no sense. GME hasn't done stuff like that. It has had big moves, but not like that. this is why this is such a bizarre thing for me. I'm trying my best to keep it as simple as possible. So if you just want the most simple, I'm trying to tell you guys over and over again, the simplest way to look at this is if it makes another support and it advances over the top with some strength, there's a decent chance it's going to run up to 45, back up again to like 35, and then run all the way to 80 something. This is fairly consistent for GME, no matter one, or at least the first two major iterations that we can kind of see here. The only real problem you're going to have if it starts dropping both the creek and the ice level, then you're going to have an issue, I think, of capitulation problem. You have to kind of account for what does that mean on the big picture if this needed to go down for that liquidity. Do we now need to go back and get a spring below 960? And I think it's a hard question to answer. I really do. And I actually think it's a hard one to kind of make a case that this just hits here and goes. It's tricky. So it's officially on June 10th. Perfect. That's what we want. That's the date we were looking at. So I had the 12th, I had the 9th. We were talking about the 9th and 10th. I'm glad we have a date. It says it's, I like that sound.
What sound?
The sound of the cat vomiting. Well, that is the cat vomiting. Somebody made that sound.
Probably just a house or something. We never know.
Yeah, it looks like it's in the 10th in the evening. That's good. Yeah, so we've got a good, I think we've got a pretty good grasp on this. The question about downside here is just like AMC. You have, I guess, a potential that this could be a full-on breakdown. And if it is, it goes really low, like 24. I don't really know what to make of that just yet. We had this really bizarre sell-off back here that went really low. And that is you. Stop.
Not my fault. I do it automatically.
All right. I know it's a habit. But we had this really low drop. It was like a 30% drop. I don't know. I don't see that as likely, but I guess if you look at this as like a retest here, it'd have to be a lot slower. I suppose it's possible. I don't think that's very likely. So this is like a really bizarre M cross with a big backup that comes back down and checks this marker. It's the same level though. That's the thing. Is like I think that's part of the design here is that this is specifically like the same distance away from this 25 mark that this is here. Almost like a creation of a trend, so to speak. So if you look at these as like 2 points of contact, and then you drop a trend down, that actually doesn't look too bad. This goes all the way back down to like that marker. That's probably more realistic. I don't know why that S-curve went so low. Yeah, that kind of works. So that's not impossible. Again, marker being about 25.90, 26. That's about as low as I would want to see it go. And it could be down there by earnings if it did continue to drop. If that's the case, we're going to have a whole lot of question marks about AMC. It would be better to have that shallow S-curve and see it build out appropriately.
Can I rename it?
Rename what?
That.
I don't know what you're talking about. You're just saying rename it.
Like
Don't turn it. Just tell me. Use your words.
the Booksy thing that you put on the second profile.
Yeah, I think that's fine. Although it might be a little confusing. It could be a cat ear pattern that consolidates at a higher price. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. There's a complication of, I don't know, man. The cat ears they're almost always built out into some kind of a wedge, but the idea of that is that you're getting a reaction and then a second reaction. And if you look at Wyckoff, it's usually associated with invertly, this is the auto reaction, and then you'll see what happens after if there's a sign of weakness, if this drops lower. So what's weird is that this didn't drop lower on GME here. It didn't technically come lower than that bottom back here. It never does. It didn't even come lower than the bottom here before the breakout. It comes right to the breakout level. It's like intentionally trying to make it like a full throwback. So I was saying it almost reads to me as a sort of change of character for that region. Like somebody wanted to go ahead and get the reset here for whatever reason and take it back towards that 2074, which is where that big candle starts picking up. And that's right where it hovers above. It doesn't go below it. It's just very odd. It's a weird motion. So like when you compare that to what we usually see on cat ears, that's pretty unusual. Because it's like it's coming back down and it does break the ice, but it didn't make a lower low. And I don't know what to make of that. It's just really bizarre. And then the fact that it came above this top is strange to me. Because that looks very distributive. And my next question is like, well, then does this hold? And that's really what we're talking about. Because to me, this looks like it could be like a double flush, right? And it looks stronger because it had the higher high. It didn't make the lower low. So this makes a higher low and then pushes up and advances. This little diagram's like what we're talking about on GME. I know I'm on the AMC side, but I just needed a black space. And then this makes an advancement. So it's kind of like, technically it looks a little bit strong, but I don't know, man. This is still a weakness. And I wouldn't want it to drop through here because then it just looks like a distribution, you know? And I definitely wouldn't want to see it, you know, come up top when it's not ready to go and then drop through again. You just have that cat ear iteration. It really becomes a question mark. And you get rid of the cat ears and you're kind of like, well, at that point, what can we make of this range? I mean, I don't know. I've said I don't know a lot today. Because the truth is, once you get to this point, if it's done something like this, it's extremely odd. But if it did something like this, you could argue that this was an auto reaction on a bull reaccumulation. This is not an auto reaction here, but it's like kind of a support kind of thing. And then you have like a higher push, and this could be going down just for a spring. I guess that's the argument that could be made, that this needs to come back to 17, I suppose. And it's not actually going to break down, and then it just goes. I have to go all the way back up to the top pretty quick. You'd have like one motion here, probably one LPS in like the middle, and then you'd have the SOS, and then you just go. And this doesn't really matter at that point, the buying climax. Except that there's some kind of a creek here that would be jumped, usually. I feel like we've seen this before on GME. I do not see this pattern very often at all on AMC, and certainly not in a distributive stock. A distributive stock, that's typically not what happens, because if it does this early advancement and it does it on weakness and it's already made the weakness, once it drops, it tends to be pretty bad. So if you're looking at GME right now and you think that this is possible, what you'd be saying is you think it goes slightly above like 35, maybe it goes like 37. It could hit like 40, 45 even. It could go higher, but then it would go all the way back down to below the floor there, which is like 17, and that's a spring action. And so it could do it all of that by August? Yeah. But that's what I was saying, is like that's more like what we see on AMC. That's not actually what we see very often on GME. It's just different. It's not what GME typically does. So, meaning like the idea of going from the top here all the way back down to the bottom. It's very strange. And the reason that even more so is because then again, it brings into question like the bigger move, right? And the fact that if this is an iteration of like this larger move, why are we not then going back down to reset? I know this is just me drawing GME's chart all over again, but then why are we not going to go down and retest this level? Because what you've just shown me is that like this iteration has, you know, a push up and then it pulls back down and there's some kind of an SOW, and then after the SOW it comes up again, but then it drops all the way back down to the bottom. That's exactly what I'm saying. So it's like, yeah, the simple version of it is, well, who cares about all that? It doesn't have to iterate outward. It could just be a spring and then go to all-time highs. I'm with you that that's a possibility, but if you watch it as like an iteration, this then changes to, you go down into August, you break out, you hit 17, you break out at 80, but then it would be like this guy on bigger picture, where there's now another SOW here. So this is just to kind of demonstrate it without all the other stuff in the way, because I had a lot of stuff on that chart. It'd be like saying that, again, so this sign of weakness right here translates to this guy here, which is, again, a backup to the floor, but again, on the bigger picture. So it's not, as not to confuse them, these are like the bigger, larger versions of the same thing. You see that? So yeah, it's a little bit nuanced and complicated, but then it brings up to the question, well then why not do this again? Because you've got now a double top motion, a 1-2, a 1-2. Why not go ahead and drop this all the way back down? I don't see why not. This strikes me as a liquidity problem. And because this becomes a sign of weakness, if the next time it drops through here, that's also going to be a sign of weakness. And it'd probably be like over here or something. I don't know where it would be. We'd have to find it, but that would also be a sign of weakness, so on and so forth. So next time it goes down, this is how cat ears look the way they look. They tend to be really choppy and weird. But if you zoom in and then zoom back out, you find that those markers end up being quite the same. So it brings into question, like, why not do this? And the answer is you can't say it won't. Like, that's kind of the whole point. Like, I really couldn't say why it wouldn't do that. I just can't. There's nothing preventing it from being a reality, in which case this can come all the way back to 10 or something. And I don't know. I mean, it is what it is. I'm not saying like that, again, this has to be the case, but you would have to take into consideration that possibility and take it very seriously. That this then needs to come down and create a new spring. This is why I don't like it, because then you have this massive second reaction, which goes up to the next top. You see why this is problematic. And it's like, whoa, what the heck's going on here, man? Nothing really. All this is right here is just another version of what this is right here in the middle. It's no different. Like this motion in the middle is this weird kind of bounce out that goes low and then goes to a new high. And then this is the same thing. Bounce out that goes low and then goes high. So it stays contained here and then drops low. It stays contained here and then drops low before it pushes to highs. And now you're at the real crux of the issue, which is like, then what? If the goal would be to distribute, is this all a massive sign of weakness for some bigger scheme to come back down to like $4, which was a target long term? And you're like, well, it's just not going to keep going indefinitely, right? You have to understand, like, none of this has happened. We all know this, right? But it goes without saying that, like, because none of this has happened, we can't define any kind of estimation that is 100%, because none of this has happened. As soon as this, if this makes this kind of higher push here, if this can hold up and advance, if that happens, like, all the rest of this changes. The future is not fixed in that way in terms of like behavior. model build outs. There's other things we could talk about. We don't have to just use a behavior model. We could just say, well, that's just a holding above a creek and it's never going to go that low again because of this. So it's just going to mark up and then mark up. I get it. Maybe this is one of the greatest limitations of iterative thinking, and I think it is a great limitation. And it's also why fractals don't work like people think they work. Your average Joe that's using like fractal build outs is not thinking about, and I don't mean it in a mean way, I just mean like I did the same thing early on. I wasn't thinking about iteration as part of itself. What's crazy about this is this build out right here, this little micro build out right here, it expands once, twice, thrice. Like it's not stagnant. And what's weird, even weirder, is that if you took this now on the whole and then shrunk it down, you would find that it matched the original, this micro. That's the crazy thing about iteration. Because the same thing they're doing on the micro, in order to achieve that liquidity targets, they're doing on the macro. And I should say it the other way around. The same thing they're doing on the macro, they're doing on the micro. That's why behavior analysis in terms of institutional behavior analysis and what Wyckoff used, that's why it works. It's been around for 100 years. And why, even though there's an advent of computer trading, and there's certainly things that are more difficult now, I think, as a result, and maybe even some things are more predictable, some things are less predictable. I don't think the idea of like behavior analysis can never really be disputed as a legitimate way of understanding stock movement, because the same thing that would drive you to pump here and distribute down to a low would drive you to pump here and distribute down to a low, would drive you to pump here and distribute down to a low. Like, it's no different. And that's part of the reason why I like it, and also part of the reason why I kind of hate it, because when you start building it out and you kind of get it, and you start looking at things like proportionally within the numbers and like the liquidity levels, when things start clicking, it gets kind of freaky because you're like, oh, this is pretty legitimate. You know, this makes a really clear and simple case for how this thing is trading and why it's trading. Especially in the case of something like a GameStop, where there's an assumption that it's going to continue to be bullish forever. There's a way to sort of game this, and it starts with these kinds of motions. There's a way to kind of game this and find the sellers that you need if you want to take it down, should that be the case. I'm not saying everybody here is bearish, but what I am saying is that there's certainly a case to be made that this is a cat ear build out that drives the price to a new low. Why not do that on the bigger picture? Well, you can't do it on the bigger picture because they'll never let it go down. I don't think that's really fair. You know, we're talking about volume proportion as well. The volume that drove this up and goes into a distribution to drive it back down that's itself a time frame. But then you look at the bigger picture and you're like, well, look at all the volume that drove this up. That's a significant eclipse of the volume here that drove this up. You don't think they could use that volume, those shares and the short positions and all that stuff, to drive it backwards in the same manner, proportionally? And then same thing over here, you know, the same manner, proportionally on the big picture? No, it's too far away. These are institutions. They play long term. And if they're involved in any of this, then it's not clear cut. It's very possible. I don't find it to be a big question mark, which is why I see it's not even a question in my brain. It's a question in some people's brains, because they don't think that, I don't know, they don't think certain things are achievable. But I'm like, yeah, but this happened, you know? Like, this is a huge influx of players right here. Like, I don't see why it's not possible that could then be for a distributive end to then take it down very low. And long term, maybe even take it down back to levels that people would thought were inconceivable. Like coming all the way back down to these $2 to $4 region down here seems inconceivable to people. Or $6 even. And I'm like, I don't know. It didn't take that much. It just doesn't, you know. Oh, it would never do that. Well, we'll see. We'll see. Long term, I'm not trying to be a bear or anything. I'm just saying, like, operators are really good at disguising their plans, and ultimately, like, we know what distribution looks like, you know. So, might be your favorite stock, but if you see something that looks like distribution or that's starting to act like it at some point, you should probably still consider it. I said on AMC I wasn't going to really mess with this too much because unless it comes back above 340, which it has not, that's my marker here, not the chart. I don't see it. The chart's only come up to like 338. It's not broken out yet. So thus far, it hit the low I thought it was going to hit, bounced, and then it needs to make that push and advance over 340. Until that happens, it's kind of a nothing burger. It still could potentially be in a downtrend, could be an LSPY. You might think it's really bullish. I bought when it hit lows here, but that's because I think it could be a shallow S-curve and bounce out. But I'm also very aware that if I'm wrong, it's possible this S-curve continues all the way down to 290s. Definitely changes the game. So just be mindful of that. Yeah, I don't believe any of that stuff. I just totally zone it out. When you say like millions of ETF obligation due for GME, okay. I'm not trying to be dismissive and rude, but I am dismissing it in my brain because like I understand it's important for some people and that to some people that's the bread and butter of the stock movement. I see it as a piece of it. It's probably relevant, but do I fully understand it? No. I can't tell you how many times I've heard over the last 3 years some hopium, piece of data about. I mean, where have you guys been? I feel like I've heard dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of times. Like, I mean, people have gone from one extreme to the next when it comes to the data. I think the only thing that probably matters is days to cover in the event of a short squeeze and short interest. And then, I don't know. What were the other ones? People were using, not ETFs, but what was the other one that people kept using? Why can I not even think of it? That's how unimportant it is to me. Richard Newton's a really smart guy, and he does a lot of due diligence. I really appreciate his work. If it's an additional kind of support of an already, decent technical analysis, then I'm all for it. But the way that I do TA is not based on, failure to delivers and stuff like that. I don't do it because I don't fully understand it, and I also don't fully subscribe to it. I think it's great to watch people that are knowledgeable, like Richard, he's a very smart guy. I recommended his channel a while back. I still recommend it. He's just somebody that seems like a really good head on his shoulder, and he also takes things he considers things very considerate. He's not just going to take things at face value, and he's not huge into like hopium and stuff either. He's pretty realistic for the most part. But that being said, I don't fully understand some of the things that he tracks. I don't necessarily agree that it always makes sense. I think the failure to deliver that's what I was thinking of, was a really interesting argument. I think he makes he made a really good video about it too. I can't remember what it was called, but that kind of explained why that would have mattered for the move last May. On the whole, though, I don't see that as the best way to, in my personal opinion. And again, you guys do what you want to do. You got to do your own due diligence, anyways. I don't see it as the best way to track moves in the market. I find it to be extremely challenging to not just time them, but also like predict when it's going to matter a lot. There seems to be a lot of times where that can gets kicked down the road and people find out later why that happened. And it's like, well, that happens in technical analysis as well. And by the way, I still think that's under the umbrella of technical analysis because it's technical stuff, but that you're analyzing. But like, I mean, if I were to say by show of hands, how many of you have heard the failure to deliver terminology and it not really panned out the way it was expected, you know? And especially for like your AMC, if all those failure to delivers yielded the profitability that was expected, it would be in a very different spot right now. So yeah, the T35 one is the one that I'm very curious about it because there's been a lot of data put out there about the T35 date where they'll say, hey, in 35 days it's going to explode. But then nothing happens. And you're like, well, what happened? And it's very confusing because it seems like there would be at this point, like a greater understanding. But I still find it to be almost like a misinformation type deal. Like I'm not really sure if the information is being regurgitated or if it's just that we're missing a piece of what that means and what could happen. But yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I agree with Heel Toe and Momo on this. I'm seeing an accumulation starting from the auto reaction on February 10th. The most recent move, 35, was the SOS. Yeah, I mean, you have to be right. Because if it's not an SOS, it's distribution. It's that simple. As soon as you make that move over the top, you guys are like, well, that's obvious. Well, it's not, though. Until you make that move over the top, you're really just kind of reading tea leaves, so to speak. You're trying to determine whether or not there's some kind of a meaning in the volume and where the lows are and where the highs are. Once it makes that top, the market is committed to trying. And it's either going to fail and become distribution or is already distribution in some cases, or it's going to advance. And that's it. Like you don't have the luxury anymore of like speculation in this particular zone. So there's some nuance there perhaps we could talk about, but on the big picture, I mean, this has already had that top. So it's come back up, it's rejecting off of it. Clearly people are selling off of it. That's evident. Clearly it had a big sell-off here. There's an M cross of sorts coming up. We already knew that was likely going to happen. Now we're waiting to see if it holds the support. And if it holds the support, we're going to try again. That's all there is to it. And then it's sort of a do or die moment for the stock. Because if it goes back up again and it fails, I think it's a challenging one to argue that it's going to continue and it's not just some kind of distributive action. It's going to come down again. So, meaning like at this point, because it came over the top. If this had not come over the top, if it had only gone to like 33 and it came back down, I wouldn't even be suggesting that yet. As I would say like, well, we'd have to see what happens. So we've progressed pretty far here. It's at a point of it needs to make advancements. So, but yeah, I'm feeling like GME's got a decent chance if it can hold up. And they got a pretty decent chance that it could kind of have that strength to move to like 40 something and then back up to 35 again. But it needs to do it now. And or if it comes back down to like 27.50, that's about as low as I want to see it. Everything else kind of leads you back down to 26 to start. So it's like a gravity well. Fang dropped backwards pretty fast today. Wow. I wonder what happened. It's a big drop. Yeah, it looks like it's having trouble. So it may need to come back down to a new low. This is one I was watching earlier thinking it might do that. I had it on the chart here. Dropped pretty far. Yeah, I mean, so I traded from 120 to 140. I didn't trade all the way up. I guess I could have, but really was just expecting it to kind of make another top here and then stop. I didn't know if it was going to get above 150, so I didn't trade it. But yeah, if you held it, great. I talked about it in the Discord for like a minute. It was very last minute, so I figured most people probably would not have seen it and probably did not trade it as a result, because it was very much like right here when it was like 126. I said, hey, this looks like it's going to react and go back up towards 150 right in this pocket. And that the moving average was breaking out. And look at that layup right there. It's like perfect. It's crazy. I had made the chart yesterday saying it looked like it was going to break here and head up, and it jumped over and landed. And that's like 15-minute, I think, time frame. But it's like anything else. It looks kind of so-so. You know, if it were going to advance, it would have to go pretty far. Like it'd have to come all the way above the top with support. So it's the same problem as before. Until that happens, I still think it's best to just look at it as a company that's pushing against bankruptcy, unfortunately. Bankruptcy doesn't mean that it's definitely dead and it won't come back in the future, but it's good for swing trading right now, and that's about what I'd leave it at. I think it's got a good chance of giving you some good 10 to 15% swings here and there. So I did trade it. I traded it Monday. Or yeah, I think it was Monday or Tuesday. I don't know. Long-term chart, man. MPW. Yeah, and I know there's like probably a lot of question marks about this one because I've been watching it for so long and it still hasn't moved. But this was a slower one than AMC from the get-go. And we talked about how some of the build out here, even now, I'm not really sure it's October versus February 2026. But there wasn't really a lot of evidence that this actually breaks 10 before February 2026, which means it doesn't return back to the top for like a year. I mean, when we first looked at this, it was probably back here actually, because I think it was on this period. So this is like a 2-year chart. But I do want to say that I still think this is a potentially really good trade. If you're comfortable with just shares only, you're not going to get burned on this very easily, in my opinion, because it's at a historic low point. It's already broken out of the widening, and it's a very tight pattern, which means it should return at some point to near $20. And I think at the bare minimum, it'll come back to like the 14 mark. Shorter term, the levels that were broken indicate 10. And from where it stands, that's a pretty big gain. So I'm really a huge fan of MPW for a number of long-term reasons. They have some problematic stuff on their balance sheet. You know, no one's going to sit here and say they don't. They've been definitely making some pretty big progress on the whole. It's one of the largest medical REITs that exists, real estate investment trusts. They are based in, I think, in Texas. But they own, I think they are, they may be the largest for medical properties. And for that reason, I thought it was a really good investment because I'm like, well, they're not medical property. Real estate isn't going anywhere. We need medical real estate. I think I underestimated what the effect of COVID would have in some of those regards, and I didn't think that because they're independently structured, they have their own, like they don't use, I don't know what the best way to describe it as. They do their own investments based on what their board wants to invest in. So some of them had some really big problems, some of their tenants, and that was their biggest issue here. That's really what caused this. But it was like a $12 billion correction that was really only worth $4 billion. So when you look at what was lost, they lost like $4 billion or something like that. But the correction itself on the market was like 12 billion. And that was way back here. So this very disproportionate market correction. And then long term, I don't want to say it's definitely like going to do this, but because that again bears a lot of question marks as well. But like long term, this is a pretty classic example of like a distribution that has that topping action, and ultimately the cat ears here are very, very steep. I would even go back to this point and suggest that's probably where they are, like right there. Even though it's a bit weird, kind of cuts through it all, but that's probably the directional input that was in. And if this correction pans out, this could easily be like $45 a share, which doesn't even seem that unreasonable to me in the grand scheme of things. I'm like, there's other ones that I looked at, real estate investment trusts that are like $40 to $60 a share. It's pretty normal. So this is a wildly undervalued, in my opinion. The biggest risk, of course, being that they just don't recover, and in some way they just keep losing money or whatever. They don't fix their problems. But this is a widening with a massive influx of volume. Is really hard for me to just kind of like sit here and say. Some people probably are sitting here thinking it's going to go bankrupt, but for me, I'm like, I don't know, man. I think it's kind of one of those sleepers that long term they pay a dividend, and long term, I think if they get that recovery effort, this is probably going to go up really far. It'll take a long time if it ever does recover that high, but I do think by like 2027 to 2028, this could be back up to like $20. So you're talking about, again, a long-term trade here, not some quick, easy money-making scheme, but something that pays a dividend that could yield, up to 200 to 300% gains over a couple years is a pretty good deal. So I've been looking at this one for a while, and it's actually gotten to the point now where it almost seems like to some folks, it probably was like, well, this feels a bit irrelevant. Like, I don't really care about this. I'm never going to invest in it. I'm not going to touch it. You do whatever you want to do, right? Like, I can't tell you how to invest your money anyways. But if you're looking at it from a technical standpoint, this had already broken out here on the RSI, and then it advanced again. And when it did that, it broke out. So this was an early investment opportunity when it hit like 370s, which I was talking about back then, that I thought it was going to come back up to like near 5, and it went way beyond that. It's got a really good chance at this point, if it holds on to that jump, it's going to just make the big advancement, because there's no reason at this point, once you see where it's at, you're like, oh, well, probably just going to go into an SOS and go. And you're looking at like a 50-50 leap from the backup point. So I'm looking at this like, well, it's backing up. As long as it holds here right around like 430s in this pocket region, it's done the jump. Now I can go ahead, and again, it didn't make a higher high here. You can go ahead and make the advancement and do an SOS. I think it's going to be one of those things that happens. I don't know when it happens exactly, but probably by, again, October, it's probably going to happen very abruptly and be very, very, very big. So this is not one that I would necessarily like dump all your money into in terms of long-term call options, unless you wanted to go way out, because the options chain's kind of dead. It doesn't like trade very well. But for shares, I think this is a potentially a good winner. Um, I'm trying to find like ways of like poking holes in this, but I don't really have any just yet. The only thing I can think is that kind of like we were talking about just a minute ago on GME, like there could be this issue of it doesn't hold the break and it goes lower. To me, I'm like, what would that even mean? Nothing really. It would just chop down towards the floor again. And I still don't necessarily think it's going to drop to new lows. So worst case, I guess, is that you come back down to like the 290 area, which is far, but that's the risk, I suppose. If there's a great risk to be had here, that's probably what it is. So yeah, and that maybe that would involve like using this as a wave cross, which it already did, but failing to hold it, you could have a cross down again, right? And then kind of zigzag through it and use that widening trend as a sort of a method for walking it down to like March 2026 or something like that, which is kind of backwards, right, from what I was expecting, but it is what it is. If that's what happens, that's what happens. So I would think of it as like a slingshot where it's building up momentum and it's going to just bump, boom, like explode one day. Right now I'm looking at it like it's a potential LPS. It just has to go back up into the SOS. So we'll see. Yeah, I guess we'll see. I don't know. It's a bit tricky. It's like a one of these tickers that you feel like everything is there, but it's just kind of missing the news it needs. You know, the sudden I don't know. It needs something. It's missing something, but all the other pieces are there. It's got high institutional involvement. Big names are trading the bottom here. So I'm like, all right. Yeah, it's kind of ended up being kind of a blasé day. There's not much to talk about. SPY made the advancement, but it's not really done anything else yet. Just kind of waiting, consolidating. Same with IWM, although this didn't actually, I don't think this pushed above the top. I think we were talking about that earlier. Ooh, Apple looks ugly. That's not good. That's unfortunate, man. Ugh. That daily candle is not pretty. Well, I mean, I was a bit worried about it when it started going because it tried to make an advancement here, but it sold all the way back down underneath to 202. That's insane. It went all the way to 206. You might say, well, it could just be this stuff like right there happening early, right? No, it needs to hold outside this trend, and it did not. That looks like a nasty sell candle. They may try to drop low. It's not good. I'll have to come back and check it by the end of the day. I think you have to just take charts as they come. So if it doesn't work in your favor, it doesn't work in your favor, you know. That's all there is to it. That bums me out. Not like super surprised. I'm just processing it. Yeah, I don't know why there's two lines there. It's weird. I might have been using like an extended trading time frame on one of them. Those markers are in a weird spot. So if you make an advancement like this and it pushes above a creek, but then the candle body closes beneath it, especially if it does so within a range at the same time, that's very bearish type price action. So what we need to see is maybe a close above 204. I think if you close at 204.20 or up to 205, it could be potentially fine. It needs to be above that 203.70 level. Hang on, let me see where that is. Yeah, maybe. Not sure why that was there. See, they like advanced along here, but they didn't go above it. Let me make sure that's the right mark. I think it's fine. 203.78. So to break above it suddenly and then drive all the way back down beneath it, it cannot close there comfortably. That would be extremely ugly. Well, I guess if that happens, I don't know why I have like duplicates here of everything. That's pretty obnoxious. Not sure why I do, but I do. Everything is like duplicated. I don't know why. Where would it go? Bummer. I thought that was really odd today when I saw Apple like popping like that. I thought that's really strange, kind of early. I would have expected it closer to the 9th. This is very, very soon. So it didn't back up here, it just jumped over. So I thought it would come up, hold here and come back, find support, and then do a single leap and hold. Instead, it went ahead early. Ugh. This kind of stuff drives me nuts. Ooh, yeah, that's ugly. That's really ugly. Why did we do that? Oh no. I've got a variety of positions in Apple, but I wouldn't change all of them, but there would be some that I might change. That's a double M. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's like an S curve. So there's a marker here that was leapt over. So bears are targeting 198, which is actually high, which I think is strange. There's another possible weakness here that comes lower still, and that's back down to the floor, 195. Man, I don't like that advancement. I really don't like that it went below. It's a bummer. So the thing about an SOS is that an SOS doesn't do this, doesn't usually go up and then all the way back and make a new low, which is strange. It would have consolidated along the top, making higher lows as it goes. So, yeah, this is not great. It could be an early sign of strength, or it could just be like a phase B top. What do you think what this changes? What does this actually change? Dang it. This could change quite a bit. Well, there's a possibility that I miscalculated what this was, and it's actually just early, which would mean that this breaks down again here, which kind of makes sense now that I'm looking at it. Yeah, like we just did this advancement. See that? It's a shrinking iterative model. So we just did this push up. This is like a double whammy up, backed up. We just did this advancement, and now we're going to back up here and then make another top and then try to sink. So that's a bit backwards from what I expected. It might work though, because I think that this did the same thing. Oh, it did. Well, yeah, I can see how this like advances over the top of the creek right there. This creek that was existing. We just did the same thing, but on like a smaller scale. So, all right. So you see how this advances over this creek, retreats, and then it bounces out on top of it. Maybe that's a bullish signal then. I don't know. But you see the same thing kind of in the light of that motion. I thought it was here. This looks like that advancement and retreat, but maybe I was way too small-minded about it, because there certainly is another one here. This is an advancement, so it's possible that I was just off by a single wave. It's possible. There's other options, like bearish options. This would imply that you're going to back up. Again, what's with these like duplicate lines? Why do I have so many of these wonky duplicate lines? I don't know. It's possible that we back up. I wonder if I have multiple groups that are showing right now. That's why. Well, we don't have that marker yet. It is similar to this, though. So maybe it's a similar area. That does work. That's a similar marker right here. Perhaps. So what I see is I see a market that's trying to advance. So you see like it's pushing up and it's trying to advance, but it's being held back and it's taking a really long time to work out the range instead. It's literally traversing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times over the same area. Lots going on right here, which granted, you know, if you're bearish, you're going to look at this as like a bear flag and say that this is just distribution. If you're bullish, then this is like a buy-in with a reaccumulation time, and you're kind of shaking out the sellers. Those are the two sides of the coin. And then I'd be looking at this, though, either way and saying, well, here's where it needs to break. That's why I said I don't really think it's that confusing in the end. But if this ends up going down into another push down, we could actually end up being in a longer motion here, which is a bit different than I expected. It might be the 16th, if that's the case, where you would see because this would be the advancement that was made, and actually it goes up at the top too, so I don't know. This comes back down on top of that right there. So it actually fails and then comes down to 198 and then it bounces. I don't know exactly how high it goes here, but it's kind of like everything I did would be delayed by a little bit, or compressed, maybe is a better word. But you would come back up, probably not make as high of a high, just like this. And then I don't know. It's chewing off that top, just like this too came over the top here. So it would also come back above that 203.78. Yeah, I guess that's going to be pretty critical. Then it would try to sell down into like a spring, or a sell down and to make a new low. And that's the next iteration right there. And then we'll see what happens. This one actually made a higher low, which was bullish in some ways. But it's hard to say. Because again, you have to take this as like, yeah, it's an iteration, but it's also part of a bigger picture. If this ends up iterating in order to make this drop down to below here, then the next one iterates in order to make it drop down below here. That's where you get down to like that 170 to 160 area pretty quick if that walk down starts happening. So it still has to make some kind of a, I don't know, like a higher low, I guess. It could end up being that this is where this ends up being like a week behind everything else. Is if this happens, then you get this kind of secondary buy-in, but it's happening on like the same level. So this one ended up being like a 50% retracement, I think. Yeah, roughly. So if I'm wrong about where it was, so this wouldn't even go that far. Go like that high. It'd be really tiny. Be like a 50% retracement, and then that could be it though, because then that could give you the jump you need over the creek. Just take off. Well, in any case, I wasn't really happy to see that. If it manages to close back above the top here, this may be irrelevant, what I just did. So I'll have to wait till the end of the day and see, but this is not looking great. So right now I think it's probably going to come back down to 198, unfortunately. And my iterations are all off by a sort of one step. But we'll see. All right. Apple had news. That's good stuff, Steven. I'd have to kind of like dig into that more, but yeah, the idea of it being nested needs to be tested, and then meaning like first you'd have to kind of show, yes, this definitely is accumulation. Then you'd have to kind of take that to the next stage and the next stage and the next stage. If it's not definitely accumulation, then it's a tough one to... This is still like a really strong angle. Which makes me wonder, is that angle... It looks like it's flattening if it ends up being this guy. Why are they trying to do this? It's the same buy-up angle. That's really weird. So somebody's putting like the same amount of effort into each of these buy-ups. That's super strange. It's very mechanical. That tracks as an iteration anyways, so we'll see. We'll see what happens. I'm not sure yet. This one I'll have to watch today. See what happens by the end of the day. It's green again, but it already made like a dip, so I'm concerned. Oh, AMD's going. It's trying. All right, it's lunchtime. I'm out. I hope you guys have a great day. Talk to you tomorrow.